They diagnosed him with acute myocardial infarct. And now I'm not a physician, but I've done enough research on some of these things because of other family issues regarding the cardiac system. And when I looked at his data, I didn't really think he'd had a heart attack, or if he did, it wasn't what started the process. Regardless of what their decision or my decision was, once you're in the hospital setting, you're in the hospital setting. And I talked with the physician about what their plans were. And they said, well, we're going to do an evidence-based treatment for your father because he's had a myocardial infarct. And that's going to include these 4 medications. Well, one of the medications, 10 years earlier when they first introduced this medication into the market, just shortly after I moved home to take care of my parents, my dad had a massive stroke and had a cerebral hemorrhage as a result of the introduction of this one particular chemical called Plavix. So I told the attending physician, I said, you cannot put him on this medication. He's already had a very severe reaction to it, and I'm very, very concerned that he will have a similar reaction. Physician went ahead and did it anyway. And 3 days later, my father popped a major vessel in his brain and was slipping very quickly. They shipped him to Toronto, which is the largest city in the province, to St. Mike's Hospital, which is probably the top neurosurgery center in the province of Ontario, for emergency surgery. The surgeon was quite well qualified and very skilled and very compassionate. I was very pleased. He explained everything to us, explained what he would do, what he wouldn't do. Didn't give my father a lot of potential for recovery. But he said that we're going to do this really simple operation. We're going to take a drill, and we're going to drill a hole inside of his head, put a tube in, and drain the blood until hopefully it clots. And we'll go from there. But knowing his situation, there's a pretty good chance, even if he does survive this surgery, there's a 50-50 chance he won't, there's a very high likelihood he's going to have a massive stroke as a result of his recovery, and you just have to be prepared for that. He may also have a reaction to the anesthetic, and you just have to be prepared for that as well. I don't know whether that was a nocebo effect, but my father did survive the surgery, but had a massive bilateral stroke. It was a very deep stroke. It affected both arms, both legs, all vocals, all speech, everything was shutting down. He and I were watching a hockey game after the surgery when the stroke started. We were in the middle of a conversation, and he started mumbling. And having been with him in his stroke 10 years earlier, I asked him, I said, Dad, are you having a stroke? And he nodded his head. So I began to adjust his neck very similarly to the way I was adjusting my godson, Dylan. And I adjusted him every half hour for 18 hours, watching him slip and slip and slip and slip. But my rationale for care at that point changed dramatically from what I would normally. My expectations for most people who come through my doors in my office is I expect the miracle of progress and recovery. And at that point I recognized that perhaps what my job was to hasten my father's transition. And it may not be for the recovery at this point, it may be for his release. And I realized that wasn't my decision to make. That was between him and his creator. So I continued adjusting. He slipped into a coma. At that point, the neurosurgery brought all their team up. So there was 5 or 6 white coats, looking very stern and stroking their chins and looking at my father, looking at his charts, looking at his dad, looking at his CAT scans, and saying his chance of coming out of the coma were almost nil. And then if he did come out of the coma, he would most likely be vegetative. I said, do not give up my father. And I continued to adjust him. I adjusted him about every 3 or 4 hours once he hit the coma. And 3 days went by, and there wasn't much positive signs, and we were getting ready to make the final plans we made. We had a do not resuscitate on record for them, so that if he went that way, that was fine with us. And then I went in about 4 o'clock in the morning. I got 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I was staying at a hotel nearby. I would just cat nap and come back. And he opened his eyes and looked around. That could be just a reflex, we were told. So I said, hi, Dad. If you know who I am, blink your eyes twice. And he blinked them twice. And I was like, okay, cool, he's not vegetative. I said, if you know where you are, blink your eyes twice. And he blinked his eyes twice. And I thought, this is really cool. So I went back to the hotel and got my mother and my sister, and they came down. And I said, do you know who this is? Blink your eyes twice. And he just looked at me. And he's looking at my mother, and he didn't recognize her at first. And that was tough, very tough. But about 4 hours later, I got the double blink. So yeah, cool, he knows who she is. He knows who I am. He recognized where he was and what was going on. But they said, you know, he'll probably not be able to talk, and he definitely will not be able to walk. And I said, don't give up on Father, not yet. So we just kept touching him, talking to him, praying for him, and adjusting him. And another day or two went by, and they were taking him for CAT scans to monitor both the stroke and the cerebral hemorrhage. And the downside of is that they couldn't introduce a normal stroke treatment because they increased the risk of him having another hemorrhage. And they couldn't treat the hemorrhage continued because it might increase the stroke risk. And I think that because of that double jeopardy that the hospital was in, was one of the reasons he recovered, is they didn't tinker with his innate intelligence. They just let nature take its course. And so we're going down for a CAT scan, and he's just looking around, and this very attractive young nurse walked by who had really taken a liking to him and spent a lot of time in the room and helping us as much as she could. And she went overtime. She came in off her shift to help out, and he watched her walk by, and he went, "Hi there." So, okay, he can talk. That's a good sign. And a couple days later, he wiggled his toes. And I was like, that's a good sign. And I said, do you think you can get up, Dad? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, let's try it. And so I'm getting him to stand up, and the duty nurse who's in charge of the floor walked in, and here I am with this man maybe 5 days after he's just come out of a coma. I've got him up on his feet. And she said, you can't do that. And I said, well, why can't I do that? This is a neuro floor. We'll have to ship him to rehab for him to do that. I'm like, where do I sign to release you from any kind of responsibility? I will take full responsibility for anything that goes wrong or right. And all the naysayers for my father, who said first he wouldn't survive, and then he'd be bedridden, or he'd be vegetative, 6 weeks after all that went down, he walked out the front door of that hospital and has come home and lives a relatively normal life, as normal as it could be, because in events like this, there's going to be some kind of